Okay, all right, here we go. So we're going to start Perek Tes, Pasuk Chav Gimel, page 590 in the classic art scroll, Perek Tes, or chapter 9, verse 23. We're going to start the story there and you'll see why. Okay, so this is, again, the context of this parsha is Inauguration Day. The Jewish people have spent a lot of time putting together the materials for the Mishkan. They built the Mishkan. They spent 7 days of training. Moshe trains Aaron and his 4 children. And now this is the day. This is the Vayiv Yom HaShmini. The parsha begins with Inauguration Day. And this is the culmination of the inauguration. So Vayavo Moshe ve'Aharon El Ohel Moed. Moshe and Aaron come to the Ohel Moed. Vayetzu. So they go into the Ohel Moed. Vayetzu, then they go out of the Ohel Moed. Very interesting, right? It doesn't tell us what they do in the Ohel Moed. We're going to come back to that. But they go in, and then they go out. Vayivarchu es ha'am, and they bless the nation. Our sages teach us that the blessing they give us is the famous priestly blessings of Yivarechecha Hashem Yishmerecha, etc. Vayerach vod Hashem al kol ha'am, and the glory of God appeared to the whole nation. Okay, Vateitze eish milifnei Hashem. Let's remember those 4 words. Vateitze eish milifnei Hashem. A fire went out from before God. Vatochal al hamizbeach. And that fire consumed the ola offering and all the fat. So this miraculous fire shows up and it burns, consumes all the offerings. Vayar kalaam vayoronu, and the entire nation saw and they praised God. Vayiplu al penehem, and they fell on their faces. Okay, now we're on page 592 at the top of the page, and here's where the infamous story begins. The story of Nadav and Avihu, the children of Aharon. So vayikhu v'nei Aharon Nadav va'avihu. The children of Aaron, Nadav and Avihu took. Now it's very interesting. It doesn't say, normally you say, Nadav and Avihu b'nei Aharon, right? You say your name, the son of, or the daughter of. Over here it says, the children of Aaron, Nadav and Avihu took. There's something broken over here, right? It's weird. Okay, we'll come back then. Ish machtaso. Each one took his own fire pan. Now again, the terminology is a little bit strange because it said, Nadav and Avihu took machtos, they took fire pans. Ish machtaso means each person took his own fire pan. If I would just say they took fire pans, I would assume they each took their own, but there's an emphasis on each one taking their own. A certain individuality that seems to be emphasized, highlighted over here, okay? Vayitnu vahein eish, they placed a fire in it. Vayasimu aleha kitores, and they placed incense on it. Vayakrivu lifnei Hashem eish zara asher lo tziva osam, and they took and they brought in front of God a fire, a strange fire, which was not commanded to them. Okay, now, let's pause here. That's all the Torah tells us that they did. It doesn't tell us they did anything like they committed any sins. Just that God did not tell them to take this fire. Okay, not great, but is that necessarily a terrible thing that God didn't say to do it? Yes, no. I don't know. Okay, God said, let's say, let's if we use the karbanos, we use the service in the Mishkan as a model to tefillah. Let's say, okay, so I'm supposed to daven 3 times a day. Shachar, Mincha, Maror. Let's say I decide to daven an extra time. Okay, I shouldn't have done it, but is it the end of the world? It's not the end of the world, right? So they bring an extra offering. Terrible? Not necessarily. Nonetheless, let's read the next pasuk. Pasuk Beis. Vateitze eish milifnei Hashem, and a fire goes out from before God. Where do we see those words before? Just a few verses before, right? It's the same exact, it's interesting, right? It's clearly something there. The Torah has many ways of saying things. There's a fire that went out that consumed the karbanos, and there's a fire that went out that consumed them. Okay, so we'll have to come back to what's going on here. Vatochal osam, and it consumed it, whereas earlier it said it consumed the things on the Mizbeach, here it consumed them. Vayamusu lifnei Hashem, and they died before God. Vayomer Moshe, Aharon, Moshe says to Aaron, Hu asher diber Hashem lemar bikrovai ekadesh. This is what God said, or as some commentators understand, this is what God is saying now, that with my holy ones, with those who are close to me, with those close to me, I will become sanctified, val pnei kalaam ekaved, and I will become glorified in front of the nation. So these are cryptic words, but it seems like there is some prophecy that God told Moshe that they are special people. Okay, and it's not that many understand this in the present tense. Aaron is grieving. Aaron is screaming. Aaron is in terrible pain over here. He just lost his 2 young sons. These 2 young sons, by the way, according to our sages, were slated to be the next leaders of the Jewish people. Moshe's children we don't hear much about them. We hear about his grandchildren, which actually kind of go astray, and whole long story for another time. But Aaron's children were actually slated to be the leaders of the Jewish people, and yet they die. Aaron is obviously beside himself, and Moshe tries to comfort him on some level by saying that God describes your children as people who are holy and people through their death teach the Jewish people something. There's some glory to God. It's undefined what that is, but it seems like it works. Vayidom Aharon, and Aaron is silent. What's that look? Go ahead.
As many times as I've read this, I never thought about what I'm thinking about now. It almost sounds as if the holy fire came and took the sacrifices, and then the holy fire came again and took them as sacrifice.
It does sound like that. It does sound like that. It does sound like there is some form of a sacrifice over here again.
Especially since it says the Krovayek Dash.
Correct. It definitely sounds like that. Now again, the one difference between clearly though, not clearly, but it would seem that they did something to bring this upon themselves. But you're right, it does seem like they're both some form of an offering, and there's go ahead. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Just wondering.
Yeah. Okay. Vayikra Moshe el Mishael ve'el Tzafan b'nei Uziel. So Moshe goes ahead and he calls the boy Nadav and Avihu's cousins, Mishael and Tzafan, Dod Aharon. Okay. Vayomer aleihem kirvus tu'ues achechem eis b'nei hakodesh al michutz l'machane. You go and you take Nadav and Avihu, who are now deceased, and bring them outside of the camp of holiness. You're not allowed to have a corpse in the camp. Take them outside. Vayikruvu, they came close. Vayisaum bechutonosam, and they took them by their clothing. Al michutz lamachane, outside of the camp. Kasher diber Moshe, as Moshe instructed them. Vayomer Moshe el Aharon el Elazar ulasamar banav, and now Moshe turns to Aaron, to Elazar, to his son, and he says, Rashechem al tifra'u, don't allow your hair to grow long. Okay? The implication, by the way, is that when you're a mourner, you do need to let your hair grow long. We actually learned that halacha over here, that for the first 30 days, you need to let your hair grow. They're being told, you are the exception. You don't do that. You don't allow your hair to grow long. Uvigdechem lo sifromu, and don't tear your clothing. Implication, a regular mourner must tear their clothing. Yeah. It's an interesting thing. Many of the laws, just parenthetically, many of the laws of mourning are not learned explicitly. They're learned implicitly. Right? By telling, there's going to be a prophet who is told not to mourn in the regular fashion, Yecheskel, and we learn from there what things should be done. And I would conjecture that the reason behind that is that the Torah there's an incredible sensitivity. We even see in this week's Parsha, it talks about the animals that are not kosher. It doesn't say the animals that are tameh. It calls them the animals asher lo tahor, which are not pure. There's this incredible sensitivity about the words that come out of our mouth. It's something which, unfortunately, we're not so good at. We even as a society, we've shifted a lot. What you could say on live television or television has shifted over the year, but there's this incredible refinement of not saying something. Even the laws of mourning, talking about death, it's just like something we don't do. It's not because we're pretending death doesn't happen. We just don't allow certain words to come out of our mouth. So the laws of mourning are not learned from what you don't do this, but rather in certain circumstances there are exceptions, and from there we just could infer other things. I believe it's along those same lines. That's a tangent. Okay. Velosa musu v'alkala eda yiktov. Don't do. If you do this, if you break the rules, you will die, and God will be angry at the nation. V'achechem kol beis Yisrael yivku es asreif asher sarf Hashem. And while you won't be mourning, you, Aaron, and Elazar and Isamar, you will continue your service in the Mishkan. It's inauguration day. You're needed to do that. The rest of Jewish people will mourn for Nadav and Avihu. You're like all one big family. You're not going to mourn, but everyone else will mourn for you. Okay? Don't leave the door. Don't leave the courtyard of the Ohel, of the Mishkan. Pentamusu, lest you die. Ki shemen mishchas Hashem aleichem, because the holy oil is upon you. Another way of saying that you have obligations right now in the Mishkan, and therefore you can't leave your post. Right? It makes, you think of like all the people in Israel who are like getting married on army bases and getting married and right away leave, going back home. Or bottom line is you're needed. You're needed for a spiritual cause, and therefore you don't do it. Other people will have you in mind. Okay? Vayasu kvar Moshe, and they did like Moshe said. Okay? The passage that immediately follows will shed a little bit of light on this last passage. Vayadaber Hashem al Aharon lemer. Then immediately afterwards, there is a prophecy given from God to Aharon, and God says, Yayin v'shechar al teisht, wine and beer don't drink. Ato v'necha itach, you and your children. Bivo'achem el ohel moed, when you come into the ohel moed, when you come to serve. Velosa musin, you won't die. Chukas olam l'dorosechem, this is an eternal law. Okay, so immediately after the passage of Nadav and Avihu, they are taught, don't go into the Mishkan intoxicated.
So it says maybe they were.
It sounds like, right. So many commentators understand it must be. The Gemara gives three reasons, which we'll come back to in a moment. One of the reasons is, what's the juxtaposition over here? It must be, although it doesn't say so explicitly, it must be that Nadav and Avihu were intoxicated. That's one possibility. That they went into the Mishkan while they were under the influences of something. Okay? It's important to distinguish between that is holy and that is mundane, between that is impure and that's pure. And to teach the Jewish people the laws. Okay, the things that were taught to Moshe.
Well,
Okay.
It also says it's not that wine and beer are forbidden.
Absolutely.
It's
In
very
that
clear
context,
about it.
it's problematic, but absolutely. Okay. So let's now focus on, so what is the reason? Okay, so clearly they did something wrong because God punishes them quite severely. Our sages are not willing to entertain the possibility that it was just because they did something that they shouldn't have done. In other words, because it can't just be what we read. It can't just be that because they brought Ketores that they weren't asked to do, that God kills them. That's not enough. There has to be more there, right? They're not willing to entertain that, and therefore they come up with different possible reasons in terms of what things could be wrong. One of them is what you just said, and that is the juxtaposition in the next passage talks about that you can't drink wine. Implication might be that they came in intoxicated. That's one reason given. There's another and now we see those textual sources, another two possible reasons that are given. One is they disrespected their elders. Where do you see that hinted to in the text?
Didn't they say, "Are you the only ones that can lead us"? Wasn't that them earlier?
That wasn't them. That's gonna be people of a similar Dasan and Aviram, who are relatives, distant relatives, but possibly relatives, but they are but that Nadav and Avihu, similar sounding names, which is interesting. There's a lot of similar letters there. Anyway, but they don't. The Midrashim do tell us that Nadav and Avihu would walk around and tell each other, one of those old fogies gonna kick the can. When are they gonna leave? Because we need to take over. Okay? Now, and there's a sense of not respecting them. Where do we see that they don't respect their elders in this passage? Any hint to it? Our sages don't pull things out of thin air. There has to be something in the text.
They were not told to go in.
Well, one, they didn't ask them. Good. But more than that, in Pasuk Aleph, again, normally you have Nadav and Avihu b'nei Aharon, right? Nadav and Avihu, the children of Aaron. The fact that it doesn't make which shows like it is me and I come from Aaron. But it doesn't do that. It says instead, the children of Aaron, Nadav and Avihu. It's almost like they don't see their real connection to their past. Okay, it's a subtle hint, but the fact that it inverts it demonstrates that it's not your typical, sense of genealogy, sense of respecting and connecting to the past. Rather, they see themselves almost as independent of their past. They kind of ignore their past. That's why B'nai Aaron, Nadav and Avihu. As opposed to the normal, you get called up to the Torah, or someone asks you your name, you say, my name, the child of X. They don't do that. Okay, the other approach that's given is the fact, very interesting, they refused to get married. They refused to get married. Where do you see that in the text that they weren't married? Doesn't say it anywhere explicitly, so it's a trick question. But there's one place that we get an allusion to this. I'm going to unpack this. I'm going to explain this a lot more. But it says, Ish machta so. They each one took their own pan. There is this strong emphasis on individuality, on being completely independent. Marriage is basically you merge, you become one with someone else. Over here, even Nadav and Avihu together, it doesn't say they went and took pans, but rather they went and each one took their own pan. There's a lot of Ish machtaso as a strong emphasis on the fact that each one is doing something separate. They want it to be separate from others. Okay? So let's try to understand what the significance of that is. Okay? Of all these three approaches, okay, I think there's something in common with all of them, but let's ask a couple of more questions based on the text that we just learned, and then we'll try to pull this all together. Another question, okay? So we have to understand this midrashim. What is this whole idea of them not drinking, not respecting their elders, not being married, like what do those ideas represent? We'll come back to that. More than that, there is clearly a contrast. Moshe and Aaron, they go into the Ohel Moed, and then they go out. We don't see what they do there. They go out, right? And they bless the people. It seems like there's being a contrast with the fact that none of you go in. Unfortunately, they never leave. Okay? Fine. That's one thing. And also there is a fire going out. A fire goes out and consumes the karbanos. A fire goes out and consumes none of you. There's clearly a connection there. Okay? What else? What else do we want to try to understand? Okay, so perhaps the idea is like this. Perhaps the idea is that in some way there's a contrast, right? Today, this day is Inauguration Day. It's the day the Mishkan is being built. Now, there are many different approaches to spirituality, to what spirituality looks like. For many of us, even though we are reared as Jews and educated as Jews, when we think of an image of spirituality, I don't know what comes to mind. There's no wrong answer. It's whatever's in your head. Go.
Sifrei Torah.
Sifrei Torah. Perfect. Beautiful. Beautiful. If you were to do a Google search of spirituality, what do you think would show up?
Second?
If you would do a Google search. Nature, right? A mountaintop,
Not
right?
For me, but
Right. Okay. But I think is the common. If you were to Google spirituality, you'd probably either see like a sunrise, a mountaintop, someone in solitude, a notion of someone being alone, being completely ascetic, monastic, completely away from the world. That is a classic model of spirituality. Mm-hmm. Now, again, this is Inauguration Day. This is the day the Jewish people are a new nation. All of our ideas are all coming thousands of years later. So let's just rewind all the way back. They're coming from Egypt. They know that the pagan worship is out. That's not what we do. And God's saying you're going to build this Ohel Moed, this place of spirituality, a place where Moed means what? Like a meeting, like a date. It's a tent of going on a date with God. Wow, amazing. What's it all about? What is this place? What is the unique Jewish version of spirituality? Okay, so two possible model. What a classic model is, it's a place where we go to connect to God. It's a place where we go to find ourselves and to really commune with God and be separate, right?
Let's be separate. No, just the opposite. When you're going together to pray to God, you're together with your people.
Good. So let's unpack that, right? You and again, you're coming. Let's think about this picture that the Torah is painting for us. There is both Moshe and Aaron and Nadav. They all go into the Mishkan. But what happens? Moshe and Aaron, they immediately go out. They almost do nothing there, as far as we know. They go there, and the main focus is the fact they're going there so they could go out. And where do they go when they leave?
to the people.
To the people. To the people. And what do they do to bless them? What's a blessing, by the way? I've always struggled with blessings. I'm not one of those people who, like, when I go to Israel, I don't, go to the big, maybe I should. But I don't, it's not my thing. It's not my thing. Not my jam, as my kids would say. Whatever it is. It's not, whatever. But what's the idea? There's a beautiful idea behind a blessing. We all do blessings. The Kohanim bless us. What's that all about? The Sfas Emes explains the whole idea of a blessing is not about the words of the blessing per se. It's about being able to recognize that we are connected to someone else. That we have to, right? What are the words that the Kohanim say at the end? You gave us a commandment to bless people, be'ahava, with love. There's a sense of bonding that, the power of the blessing is I'm able to humble myself, and say, I need you to give me something. It speaks to this relationship with others, right? That's the power of a blessing, is my ability to say, maybe it's my arrogance that holds me back from going to the rabbis in Israel, that I don't know, whatever it is, but the point is that to stand there and say, I need something from you, I'm going to accept something from you, that's the power of blessing. It's about relationships, it's about connecting with others. Moshe and Aaron, they go into the Mishkan, and they exit the Mishkan. And they take the spirituality that they found there, a recharge, a power, not to stay there, not to run away from the world, but rather to go and take that spirituality and bring it outside. They take that spirituality and they bless the people. They connect to the people. Be'ahava, with love. There's this beautiful connection, like you were saying. That's the picture.
They're only messengers. It's not for them.
Exactly. Well, yes. That's certainly part of the Kohanim.
Moses says to Aaron, he says, this is what God said.
This is what God says. That's right. There's a sense of humility, the sense of allowing God to channel through us and then to connect to others. So they go, Moshe and Aaron paint one picture of the Mishkan. And that is, they go into the Ohel Moed, they immediately go out and connect, bring it to the people, bring it to the world around us. Whereas Nadav and Avihu, again, they are highly individualistic people. Right? How do we see that? We saw that from Ish Machtaso, but our sages say they don't want to get married. Right? What's marriage about? Marriage is about having some relationship, having a connection, being very part of this world. Right? There's something very, earthy about being married. You've changed, God willing.
Isn't that having children and making it continue?
Oh, exactly. Yeah. And but certainly, and having children, being connected to this world, right? And then we could talk very practically about the fact, all the challenge, all the very, you might be on a perch, and you might think you're a great person until you have children who poke every single button that you ever thought knew and did not know that you have, right? There's this sense that it brings you down to to earth. It's incredibly humbling and incredibly, you have to get your hands dirty. Literally, figuratively, that is part of having children. Nadav and Avihu, that's not their spirituality. Their spirituality, they say, we're individuals. It's us and it's God. Whereas Moshe and Aaron, right, it's just like this, think of the imagery. They're all going into the Mishkan. Moshe and Aaron immediately take the spirituality there and bring it out to the people. Nadav and Avihu say, we're running away from the people. They are the ones, when you do that Google search, they match with what the world understands of spirituality. It's about running away, right? So Moshe and Aaron, again, so they see, Moshe and Aaron saw the Mishkan as a place to recharge, to gain spirituality, and then they go and connect to the nation, right? Whereas they saw the Mishkan as a place to escape from the masses. Think about it. As Moshe and Aaron are going out, as all the people are gathered, they're like, this ain't for us. We're too cool. I don't mean that in a cynical sense. We don't want to be part of the masses. We want to be connecting to God in the deepest possible way, right? So Moshe and Aaron go from the Mishkan to the imperfect people and the imperfect world, whereas none of you go away from the imperfect world and they escape from the imperfect world. Now let's think about that word escaping for a second, because I think that also goes to one of the explanations given by our sages. Again, the one explanation was they didn't like the old people. It was about them. They were waiting for they wanted to do things their own way. They didn't want to get married. So we explained those a little bit. But the third approach was that they went in intoxicated. They went in drunk. There's a law. Not only you're not allowed to go to the Mishkan intoxicated, you're not allowed to pray when intoxicated. That's brought down in the Shulchan Aruch. If you have had too many drinks, that you would not be able to, meet your boss. Okay, whatever level that is, more or less, and have a business meeting, you cannot pray.
It comes from the Chana story, doesn't it? It says,
Yeah.
You think she's drunk?
Right.
Good. Good. It comes from there and it comes from here. It comes from here as well. Meaning this is the earliest source where it says you can't go into the Mishkan. It's the same idea. You can't turn to God. But some of the commentators ask, why not? Why not? There are cultures, Native Americans, for example, there it's well known, but other cultures as well, where it's not as well documented, where they would specifically use, whether it's mushrooms or different substances, to alter their state of mind, to elevate themselves. And some of you may have, on Purim, I don't know, at the end of Purim, I had a few cups of wine or whatever it is, and, I don't know, I find it very spiritual. I'm able to, I don't know, if you're all welcome to come if you missed last year. It's singing, it's beautiful, it's elevating, right? So one could argue that, no, being in this altered state is actually something which is wonderful. It's a beautiful way to connect to God. There's a good argument to be made along those lines. Many people say, when I get high, I'm the most spiritual possible, right? That's when I'm most spiritual. Okay. But Judaism, so the Ishbitzer is one of the, he's a Hasidic rabbi, lived about over 100 years ago or so, and he argued that the reason the Torah does not allow a person to drink before praying is because our version of prayer is not to escape from the world, but rather to come in contact with what the world is, with what the world is really all about. Prayer does not prayer is not an escape to say, the world is really complete. On the contrary, it reminds us of the incompleteness of the world, right? What are we saying? Every prayer is about what we need. Every prayer is Baruch Aleinu es Hashem Hazos, help the economy. Yerushalayim Yircha, Jerusalem's under fire. Rebuild Yerushalayim. Rifa'enu, we're sick. Make us better. Prayer is not about pretending the world is something else. It's not about sugarcoating. It's not about being in an altered state. It's about getting in touch with the tension, the brokenness of the world, and that's our starting point. And then we could grow and change it and through a prayer, etc., etc. But you need to be very much engaged with the world as it is in order for that to happen. Nadav and Avihu are once again running away from the world. Whether they were drinking or not, I'm not sure. But the idea behind not being intoxicated certainly is something that they lived by. This notion of escapism. We don't want to be with those people. We don't want to be outside the Mishkan. We want to set up tents. We want to live monastic lives in the Mishkan. We want this to be our sanctuary where we're able to be safeguarded from the world around us. It's a beautiful model of spirituality, but it's not Jewish. Nadav and Avihu, so specifically on this day, on inauguration day, it was so critical. Yes, it's a terrible tragedy that Nadav and Avihu died. And they weren't bad people. They were supposed to be the next leaders of the Jewish people. They were also highly spiritual people. People that, the Midrashim say were on a higher level in some respects than Moshe and Aaron. But their version of spirituality was terribly off. And especially on this opening day of the Mishkan, it was critical. In other words, their timing was also pretty poor, because it's critical on this opening day that the people understood what real spirituality is. Whereas Moshe and Aaron go in, right? There's that clear contrast. They go in and go out, there's clearly a contrast. They go in and they take the spirituality and bring it out. We go to shul, we go to learn, whatever it is, and then we bring the spirituality to work, to our friends, to our family. That is the Jewish version. Nadav and Avihu said no. It's all about being separate from one another. There's no connection with others. There's no connection with the past. No connection even with the past, their parents. No connection with even the present, their siblings, them together. And there's just a sense of escaping from the world around them. That was their version of spirituality, a very popular version of spirituality, but not the Jewish version. And for that reason, tragically, Hashem had to take their lives. And again, God kills them in a very elevated way. The Chazal say their bodies were completely intact. Like a fire came down, so to speak. The Gemara says it entered their nostrils and took their soul. So they died in a very spiritual way. They were very spiritual people. But that's not Jewish version of spirituality. And on the opening day, inauguration day, we need to learn that lesson. Spirituality does not live here. There's nothing that bother, in shul we act better. Yeah, in shul we do act better. But then we need to take it and bring it home, bring it to the world. And that, I believe, is a fundamental lesson that we learn from Nadav and Avihu.
So, that's a really